we're back with another A24 movie. Today when I went to see this movie, which is none other than Backrooms, uh, I did really got a kind of like a howl of trailers that a lot of them belong to A24, in which I do have kind of like this respect relationship with most of the movies. Although most of those A24 movies are really kind of like experimental or art housey, sometimes for the better or sometimes for the worse. But I'm not gonna deny that most of the time when it tries to get a little bit artsy, it's one of those interesting movies. I mean, as far as I can remember, probably the last time I was disappointed on an A24 movie was with the movie Death of a Unicorn. I think that was an A24 movie, if I can remember right. But when there is something that somehow resembles something artsy, but also have kind of like the potential to be creepy, but by being minimalistic or sometimes extreme, whatever side you want to go, spectrum they want to go. I get kind of like this interest, and as a film buff, or especially someone who is really has a kick on horror movies for the most part. And this is the reason why I was interested about Backrooms. Again, that's the movie that I just saw. And this was actually kind of like a good heal for me because honestly, I've been going through kind of like I had a little bit of a stomach pain. I don't know what it is. Probably but I kind of realized that there is a certain type of bacon that doesn't make me sit right. And that's how kind of like it started. Don't worry, it's not too bad. But I also kind of needed kind of like a movie that I was wanting to watch, because there was another movie that I'm gonna release the vlog sooner or later that I watched this week. It's gonna be a bite size, I'm gonna tell you. But for some reason, this whole week, I was feeling kind of like the tired, sleepy, and somehow lazy, I would say. So I'm gonna have to give my metabolism a little bit of a kick to keep me up and say, hey, at least do it. I know that it's not something that a lot of people do it, but hey, it's a hobby that you like to share or something like that. So I'm gonna get a kick out of that. So but okay. So what else I can say about Backrooms? I understand that probably is inspired by some creepypastas that I am not aware of. I know that the director also made some shorts that I am also not aware. So let's say that I went in a little bit kind of like blind. And I will say that I did saw some of those scary creepypastas that you see kind of like on the internet, because the internet itself kind of, when it came into fruition little by little, it also has kind of like this tendency to give some kind of scary stuff, and also some scary myths. I mean, look at what happened to the Slender Man, that kind of became kind of like a pop culture phenomenon, man, to the point that people will kind of even believe some scary tales that they tell, or sometimes they just show a picture, and the picture is so uncanny or something kind of like unsettling, and it is enough to give you the creeps, especially when you are younger and you are a little bit too naive to the world and all that. And that's kind of like the sensation that I had with this movie, Backrooms, in which in which even from the trailer, they don't show basically they don't show any monster. It just go with the plot about empty spaces, or kind of like going through a big space, a closed space, I'll say. The whole emptiness, and also the seeing, things scatter around, almost like you're going through an abandoned building. Yeah, and not necessarily destroy or dusty or something like that. Even when it looks clean, but the way it is it is arranged, it kind of gives this unsettling feeling of eeriness, dread, and sometimes kind of like this loneliness that it really touches upon. With me saying that, you can tell that I did ended up liking this movie. And while this movie I will say that this movie is not as kind of like as amazingly good and funny like Obsession. Or personally, if there's kind of like a movie that kind of captured that same feeling, I think Exit 8 did it better. But that's not. I'm not saying that to degrade the movie, because Backrooms was indeed was a ride. It was kind of like a slow ride, but it keeps you keeps you in, especially on how well it constructs the characters, and then the imagery is really expertly done. The camera work and the set design. I will probably say that is probably my, apart from Exit 8, Backroom's probably gonna have also one of my favorite set designs that I have seen this year, and I know that I'm gonna sound kind of like artsy, because it's basically just making this kind of like rooms that are empty, but also having the furniture having kind of like cut or something like that, or mesh in, almost like someone who decided to make the most artsy interior decorating you can ever imagine. That's at least saying much. So for an artistic point of view, I'm gonna respect this movie a lot from what it is. As for the story itself, it's also intriguing. It basically, the movie centers around two characters, which is first one guy named Clark, who's played by this actor named Chiwetel for your IMDb, and his psychologist Mary, played by Renee Reinsberg. What's with up with those names? Okay, that's just nitpicking. But basically, the story centers on them, in which the character of Clark, he's a guy who's struggling in his business. But I forgot to mention right on the get-go, this movie, it's set on the 90s, in the 90s. And this guy is struggling with his furniture store. He even makes infomercials, you saw these infomercial people from early days, in which they dress up like a cowboy or a pirate, and he's like, "Hey, this is crazy Larry. I'm so crazy, and I'm gonna give you this furniture with great discounts that you have to be crazy to buy them." That kind of guy, and well, he's struggling not only financially but also personally, because he went through a divorce. He was kicked out by his wife because of he was drunk. And at the same time, the psychologist also has her own demons, in which she has to go through a childhood trauma, that basically she lived with a paranoid mother, that she was crazy. She said that everyone is watching her and all this stuff, and lock her up, and thankfully, of course, after that mother was gone, she basically gets out of that childhood home that she didn't want it to be, but she still keeps a memento, which is a part of the cement that that she had before she and her mother, well, had a nice moment or something like that. But that's kind of like the nutshell of the psychology of these people. But the plot kicks in when Clark, he's living in the furniture store and all that stuff. And then he finds he turned on some fuses that then the house kind of began flicker the lights and all this stuff. And then out of the blue, he finds out that one of the walls of the place, it apparently it leads him to kind of like a hidden world where in which once he enters, he goes into what I described you before. Kind of like this world that looks like a abandoned office building. The furnitures are all over the place, and they are stacked. They're stacked. Some are kind of like blended into the walls or some of the interior, or even to the walls themselves. They're reversed, kind of like stop, and the whole thing is kind of like gigantic to the point that once you go there, the whole empty spaces and the atmosphere, it kind of gives this eerie sensation, because when you go to these places and there's this silence and you just walk around, and then the creepy part comes is that this place apparently there's something following them. So, well, that's kind of like the gist of it. There's this place, and for some reason they decide. We start at kind of like the first half of the movie following Clark, in which he finds this place. He tells the psychologist Mary. She doesn't technically believe. Well, it's not like she doesn't believe it. She's kind of like struggling, because what will you do if someone comes to you and say that, hey, I found kind of like this world that you can go through when you go through a wall, and you're like, what? This kind of sounds like, that Simpsons episode from the Treehouse of Horror, that where when Homer goes through a wall and then he finds the world where he turns 3D. It's kind of that same idea, but instead of going through a 3D world, it's just, again, an empty space, kind of like empty spaces. And I will say that not only the scenery is the one that catches you on, it's also, well, the characters themselves, in which you can, like I said, we got a very good acting with both leads. With, of course, you kind of feel a little bit bad for Clark, in which he basically has kind of like his own inner demons. He's struggling with his business, and well, he has this temper, we'll say, and well, he's kind of like the more fiery of all the characters, and then the second half is when we get to see Mary going through to the other world. But at the same time, the movie little by little stacks, in which we know this character, in which she also has to go through her past, and well, she's trying to cope this whole situation, and she also is on her medication. Yeah, so basically that's kind of like the thing that happens. Well, I don't want to spoil too much about the characters, because there's also other characters that they set in. One of them, actually two of them, is, well, you're gonna know that these are the characters that are gonna be in the meat grinder, which is kind of like this young guy and his girlfriend, and also the movie also centers around some other characters I will say that this is probably kind of like the weakest part of the movie, which when they present these characters, it kind of ruins a little bit the surprise at the end, and then you kind of get kind of like an early early premonition by saying that, okay, I see what's kind of going on. I can see what it is, or you and for the most part, if you kind of see all these kind of movies, you're gonna be right. You're gonna nail it. And now I'm gonna talk about what the movie wins, which is again the cinematography, in which when they go to the other world, the buildings. I already explained what it is. I'm talking redundantly because I'm always impressed. You know how they make kind of like this this eerie world, which is just, and the camera shots is not. It doesn't have too much close up shots. It really lets the audience sink in with the open spaces and seeing these kind of like, I would say, like a really Art Deco, but also kind of like it makes you feel like a mouse in a maze, and it is a maze, and sometimes they see kind of like holes where the tools can get, or doors that they have these illusions of death, the perspective, and it's almost like it's a madhouse that it's almost like an Alice in Wonderland kind of situation, but again and the whole emptiness is if you're kind of into it, you can get a little bit too disturbed. Thankfully, I'm not into it, but I was more like amazed. And even the scares are not cheap. The cheats are it's only kind of like this eerie mood, and there's no orchestra string when there's kind of like something that is gonna scare you. So that's pretty much it. Also, and by the way, the movie does its best to put that this movie is set in the 90s, in which we see mostly 90s technology. And I will say that me, as a sucker of found footage movies, there is two moments, which is the intro and sometime later in the movie, in which I get a kick on, in which the movie kind of gets a little bit found footage-y, but that they make it to emulate the 90s camera with the aspect, with the different aspect ratio, the different the low quality resolution, that it really looks like the 90s found footage that you might find on the VHS franchise. And I'm a big sucker for that, and I absolutely love those moments. These are kind of like the moments in which I was hooked. And for a movie that have this kind of scenery, I think those were perfect. And also, I'm glad that they don't overstay its welcome. It doesn't go found footagey all the time. So let's say that this is kind of like a treat it's kind of like a treat, especially for found footage for apologists like me. I know that not many people like found footage, but I'm a big sucker for that. So leave it for what it is. And I think that I will reveal a little bit that the movie itself is also have a little bit of a clever lore, in which despite the whole thing looking like empty, lonely, and all this stuff, it's you know, one of those games video games in which you play these kind of like lonely games, but you always kind of get this sense that something is following you, and sometimes when they attack you, it kind of comes to kind of like this very scary. This is what this movie plays around, and yes, there are monsters. Well, but it's not a monster kind of like Big Bad Wolf or something like that. Yeah, actually, it's more psychological. The creatures are basically, let's say that it's something like a clone of you, but because it is a world that basically is. It's basically a buildup of memories of people inhabiting in the real world and this world, it kind of remembers what it is, but like a person, it's not perfect, and sometimes they find the what it remembers, those creatures, for lack of better words. They look, how best I can describe it. It's almost like it just saw this movie kind of like Pan's Labyrinth, which I haven't, but I've seen kind of like the design of the creatures. It has kind of like these slight deformities of normal people, like stuff, because it doesn't remember from what it is. It has kind of like multiple eyes or multiple noses or something like that. And well, although the world it's not that the world kind of makes it like they want to cross the other world. No, this is not the function of this world. For some reason it reminds me of some of the kind of like the Persona games, especially Persona 4 and Persona 5, in which you go to other worlds, which is the world of people psychics, and then they found out other versions of those. A little bit like that kind of reminded me, and it kind of turns a little bit into kind of like this freak show, for lack of better words. So, and yeah, that's kind of like the creepy thing that I can say about these creatures. Oh, and by the way, I think you can eat them too. That was honestly kind of like I'm not gonna reveal you too much, but there's a moment in which one of the characters said, "Oh, by the way, you can eat them," and it kind of turns into this Texas Chainsaw Massacre kind of knockoff, and that thing is a little bit kind of like weird, but also funny. And speaking of funny, I'll also give a lot of points in which the movie for a moment cuts with some other character watching television, and it's playing the Never-Ending Story, which that gave me a delight, because if you know me, the Never-Ending Story is my favorite movie of all time. Although they gave up a little bit the ending of that movie, but I'll still kind of question why you prepare popcorn right when the movie is almost ending. Well, I don't know. That's kind of what they do. So that's technically a lot of the positives I can say about this movie. The negative, in order to not overhype the ego about this movie, is that I think this movie is not gonna be for people who are expecting, well, kind of like a gore house movie, or they want fast-paced action, because this is not one of them. The building it is slow, but I still I'm gonna admit that it is steady, and you're not gonna get. And well, it is very interesting, I'll say, and I'll give it credit for giving out kind of like a theme for something that is kind of like eerie, and not unlike another movie that I just watched, and I was disappointed, because that was kind of like a paint by number kind of movie, but Backrooms not. This one tries to build itself kind of like its lore, and I understand that people I overheard some people getting a little bit confused with the ending, because the ending doesn't solve too much of the problems, but I appreciate it, because this is basically what a lot of horror movies could do. So I will say that it does have a bit of this Lovecraftian kind of tone, in which some things we don't know. We don't get all the answer, but that's basically what makes this whole thing creepy in a way. It does have, of course, its third act climax, and I will admit that most of the how can I say, the quote unquote monsters are not exactly scary. I'll say. You can see a little bit of the CGI also, but I am gonna give it credit that when the chase scene happens, is you don't see very clearly the big bad, or I was for lack of a better word, and in a way, it kind of remind me of the creature that you see in the book of what was the Scary Tales from Tell in the Dark, and that kind of vibe. That's what I will say. So I think that's all I can say about Backdoors. It's one of the most visually interesting movies I have seen, and I will be glad to give this movie an award for best set decor by being minimalistic, kind of like these art houses that you just take a picture of something very minimalistic, but it's so artsy that it's just almost like a rabbit that you went deep to the rabbit hole of eeriness. Which is kind of like I understand that this is kind of like a contrast with Obsession, because in Obsession I gave it an award for the biggest idiot of this year, but this one I'll give it the award for the best set decor for what it is. So yeah, that's technically I will say about Backrooms. If you're curious, check it out. You can even make it a double feature with Obsession if you want to. Just don't get too obsessed, because we don't know what could be lurking behind those walls.